everyone, and welcome to our latest webinar presented in association with Nokia, bringing FRMCS on board. My name's Nick Kingsley, and I'm the Executive Editor of Railway Gazette International, and I'll be your host over the course of the next hour. The global rail sector is on the cusp of a major transition as the 2G telecoms technology of GSM-R approaches the end of its life to be replaced by a higher capacity, low latency, future railway mobile communications system. However, railways around the world face a significant challenge in managing the migration from GSM-R to the future 5G-based platform, including navigating a period where both systems are likely to need to operate in parallel. Over the course of this webinar, we'll hear from a panel of industry experts who'll be exploring the factors that could determine the success of the transition to FRMCS. In particular, we're keen to discuss how FRMCS can impact not just infrastructure managers and not just telecoms companies, but the wider rail ecosystem as a whole. Please keep in mind that this session will be available to stream again in on-demand format within 24 hours of this broadcast. Our interactive streaming platform enables viewers to pose their questions to our panelists in real time. So please do submit your questions in the box below the video feed. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over and let our panelists, our distinguished guests, introduce themselves. So let me hand over first to Emanuele from Nokia. Emanuele, please just tell the audience about yourself and your role within FRMCS.
Hello, good morning, good evening, afternoon, everyone. Emanuele Diliberto. I'm currently Nokia coordinating the global sales and business development activity when it comes to the railway segment, which is super important for us in our mission critical enterprise, let's say, activities. In particular, when it comes to, let's say, GSM-R, FRMCS, cybersecurity,
Perfect, thank you, Emanuele. You're in Melbourne currently, so it is good evening for you and good morning for me here in London. Thank you very much. We're joined also by Jochen Appel from Nokia. So Jochen, also please just introduce yourself and perhaps give the audience a sense of your specialist skills in FRMCS.
Yes, thank you very much, Nick. So Jochen Appel, I'm responsible for the mission critical mobile infrastructure business in Europe. And this covers not just rail, but also public safety and the energy sector. But of course, where we see most of the traction at the moment is in rail defining the new standards going into the 5G world.
Thank you. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Christophe Depi from Capgemini, over to you.
Yeah, thank you. I'm Christophe Depi. I'm CTO and Head of Solutioning for the railway industry at Capgemini Engineering, which is the R&D powerhouse of Cap. Acting as a strategic advisor and solution leader, I help railway manufacturer and operators to define their technologies in delivering architecture to drive transformation and sustainability. For your information, I've supported initiatives of integrated telco value into other industries in the past, and I'm here today to share with you insight on how technology can shape the future of rail mobility.
Yeah, thank you very much. And yeah, you've got a very broad set of insights around the reality of the engineering reality of how the migration to FRMCS is going to be managed. So we look forward to hearing more about that over the course of the next hour. And then last but not least, from Europe's Rail, Karel van Gils, over to you. You're joining us from Madrid this morning.
Yes, good morning. Karel van Gils, Senior Program Manager at Europe's Rail. Europe's Rail is the European Research and Innovation Program, where I'm leading the deployment activities and where we just set up at the beginning of this year an activity on FRMCS deployment. Before that, I was 30 years in the railway business, and my last position before I joined EU Rail was CTO at ProRail, the Dutch rail infra manager.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Yeah, I think your experience with ProRail and elsewhere in the rail and public transport sector, I think is going to be also invaluable over the course of this discussion. So before we go any further, and again, I will just remind everyone watching, please do submit your questions live as we go through the panel session. But before we start, we've been running a poll which is still open for you to vote. How far do you believe the rail sector is ready for the transition to FRMCS? So this is in the feed below the video. Please do vote. We've had quite a number of responses to this poll already. Currently, the of the options to answer, we have neutral, not at all, moderately ready, and very ready. And the overwhelming answer, with 46% of the votes so far, is that the rail sector is moderately ready for the transition to FRMCS, which I guess is probably not a bad position to be in, but I think that reflects a sense in the industry that FRMCS is gaining momentum. So, Emanuele, I'm just going to come back to you then. Why don't you give us a bit of a scene setter for this discussion, and just explain to the audience why the transition or the migration to FRMCS is such an urgent priority?
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Well, certainly, I mean, when UIC started to establish the project for, let's say, the new generation after, let's say, GSM-R back in a bit more than 10 years ago, I mean, clearly the compelling event is quite evidently the fact that we are using, in the rail industry, a 2G technology, engineered this in the 90s, deployed, many years ago. And clearly, I mean, there is an industry position also, represented by Unitel as part of Unifed that really I mean, once we enter the next decade, we're really starting to run on a technology which is pretty, let's say, very mature, okay, up to the point of almost being obsolete. So clearly, you can still, let's say, run it for a certain period of time, but clearly the GSM-R maturity is certainly an element that has been triggering, but not only, using narrowband technology is pretty, again, old style to some degree, and clearly all the new use cases and digitalization that the employment of a broadband technology could unlock and offer to the railway in really almost like a system that they control is also very, very much motivating, the sector to look into the use of 3GPP technology, broadband technology.
And just tell us a little bit about where we stand in terms of defining the standards for FRMCS, because there's obviously so much work to be done around the technology itself and specifying what that is going to look like. Do you just want to set the scene a little bit for that challenge as well?
Yeah, I mean, under the guidance and coordination of UIC, who is, by the way, now on a yearly cadence, organizing actually in Paris in the headquarters. This seems to be the rhythm, almost once a year, a conference to update the industry. I mean, we are really now, I think, a couple of years away from finalizing the real reference project that will determine, the baseline of the specification that then will be embraced and, become TSIs, here in Europe. By ERA. So, I mean, after the 5G rail project was launched and finished, let's say a couple of years back, then now the Morane 2 started, and it will unfold over a couple of years. So, FRMCS V3 should be the target and the ambition and the commitment, I would say, of the industry, of this very wide ecosystem industry signaling, railway operator, telecom vendors such as ourselves is, by the end of 27 to finalize, the field test and that proven in the various location what needs to be proven to then, let's say, allow over the course of 2028 to really have actually the TSI. So and this has been a journey, again, started back in 2014. It all started, we were still talking at that time about 4G. I mean, now clearly this is fundamentally a base, let's say 5G baseline. So that's a bit where we stand at the moment when it comes to the standardization progress.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. You mentioned the UIC conference in Paris. I think many of us on this call, including myself, were there. So if people want to read a report, my report from the UIC FRMCS conference in Paris, that's available on railwaygazette.com. Well, that's the only plug for my content this morning in the broadcast. Carol, I'll come to you because we had our poll at the top of this webinar, but you as Europe's Rail have been doing much more detailed surveys into the state of the market. So do you want to just give us a brief overview as to what your survey into the migration preparation of the rail industry, what you've learned about the European rail sector in particular, and their state of readiness?
Yes, as Emanuele already said, a lot of activities are ongoing at the specification, the testing, the Morane 2, and the preparation for the upcoming TSI. But we started to analyze the first activities we must have after the TSI is published. So stepping into deployment, stepping into migration. And for that, to back up the activities and to have a better insight in the upcoming big transformation, we started a survey in this summer where we got over 60 responses on this first survey, and we asked questions to the industry, trackside suppliers, but also rolling stock suppliers. We asked questions to the lessors, but also to RUs and IMs, but also to NSAs on the upcoming transformation and the upcoming big migration. And we asked questions on how are you aware of this upcoming transition? Are you aware of the scenario you have to do, the timelines, etc.? So, and there were some interesting results coming out of this first questionnaire. What we saw, to be honest, was a little awareness of the upcoming big transformation, especially within the smaller leasing companies and the smaller member states, the smaller European member states. But we also got some information coming from the lessors and the RUs, for example, that they say, yes, we will start with the one-to-one replacement of GSM-R, but we are also interested in the future-proofness of the system and of the years after the first edition is published and delivered by the industry. For example, we asked also a question to the IMs: do you want to use MNOs later on? And more of half said, yeah, we are quite interested to work together with MNOs, maybe for fallback scenarios or on capacity, etc. So there were lots of questions and answers in this first initial survey, and it's available on the EURL website.
Yeah, thank you. I think you've shone a light there on this issue that we need to talk about leasing companies. We need to talk about, railway undertakings, to use the European parlance, or train operators, as we also say. That there is, particularly when it comes to the fitting of onboard equipment for FRMCS, there are some huge investments upcoming as part of this migration that is not just for the telecoms industry, and it isn't just about wayside and line-side assets that are the domain of the infrastructure manager. Christoph, tell us, let's expand a little bit on some of the points that Carol has just made. Just tell us a little bit from your point of view, why, should we think of FRMCS as a telco expertise issue, or just explain who else, needs to think about this migration and why it matters to the rest of the rail ecosystem?
Yeah, I think that the ones who think that FRMCS is a telco issue may miss tomorrow, or tomorrow challenges. Telco will enable FRMCS, but FRMCS is not telco. Why are we talking about FRMCS? For sure, because of the end of life of GSM-R, and because we have to renew certain techno stacks. That's key, and that's clear. However, let us look at our business, at our industry. I think that all of us have now new trends to cope with and to address. Of course, we are looking for more train capacities, to have more corridors, to have safer trains with new services, with new functions, to integrate new technology for us as industrials, but also for the services. Some of you may look to have more view and predictive actions into your maintenance in order to cope with other operations. But meanwhile, you also aim to go to passenger and to mobility as a service. So telco is the enabler. And the reason why FRMCS is so crucial to us is because we bring this enablement of telco, and not only as operators, but also as manufacturers and signaling and all the different parties, so then our industry with our standards, with our regulations, and the way to cope to them, integrating the telco activity and the way to manage such a program transformation, which is one of the biggest ones that I've seen on my life on that, because it's widespread, different countries, different technos, different complex ecosystem, led by telco, or seems to be led by telco, but which is not. The fact is, as a non-telco expert, everybody is maybe lost by the telco activity. But once again, we have to define what are the use cases we want to tackle. we have to define what are the functions we want to enable. We have to secure that we are keeping the safety of our business, I mean on a trend business, not as an economic one. But meanwhile, we also have to look at the investment we have to place into position for today and tomorrow. So that's why, for me, FRMCS is not a telco point. It has to be managed with telco partners, for sure, partners. But this is answering all trends to gain access to more data, more value, and more functions.
Yeah, thank you, and I think it is worth pointing out. I know I've probably written articles that have said this myself, that from a rail sector point of view, FRMCS is coming at the same time as some other really huge digitalization initiatives, especially in Europe, with things like the digital automatic coupler in rail freight, and of course the ERTMS train control rollout program, which was mentioned, and the relationship between FRMCS and ERTMS, I think, is going to be quite critical. It was mentioned by Oana Gergenescu at the US of ERA at the UIC conference in Paris. So perhaps that's a question we can come back to over the course of the next sort of 40 minutes. But Jochen Appel, I just wanted to turn to you. Tell us a little bit about the challenges of running GSM-R and FRMCS potentially together. Just tell us a little bit about what you see as some of the challenges and perhaps some of the technology that can help railways and infrastructure managers with the migration, especially if we're going to have a period of GSM-R and FRMCS running together.
Yeah, thanks, Nick. Look, I think going forward, there will be operations of GSM-R and FRMCS in parallel for a couple of years. Everybody has to basically build up FRMCS in parallel to a running GSM-R network to allow the railway undertakings also to migrate their onboard equipment. And maybe we talk about timeframes of 5, maybe even 10 years. So of course there is a need for an interworking function, because you never know what the particular train which is on the track has onboarded as a telco technology. So it can be GSM-R and it can be already FRMCS. So there is a interworking needed on a functional level. But there's also a need for the infrastructure manager to deal with the fact that they now need to run 2 networks in parallel from an operational point of view. And the migration is something which has, of course, implication on the radio side. And there is let's say a very simple thing like reusing existing GSM-R towers, building up new towers. The entire radio network planning is something which needs to happen, I think, for most of the rail operators now, right? Because they need to build up additional also passive infrastructure, and because we use different spectrum going forward in a first place, but also on the core side, where some of the railway infrastructure managers are already taking the step, moving basically their GSM-R core deployment into something which is already, I would say, FRMCS ready, or adopting FRMCS based technologies. In 5G, you have a lot of, let's say, cloud-based technologies, and you can already adopt them at the moment. So the challenges are predominantly you need to run this in parallel, and you have a workforce which is probably not really set up for let's say managing both. And of course, there's a need for educating the existing workforce with these, especially with these new technologies which need to be adopted for FRMCS as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And the skills challenge, it's probably something we won't touch on in huge detail this morning, but yeah, clearly there's a massive issue there around the upskilling, particularly of rail workforces, which I think is a challenge for digitalization across the railway sector in all sorts of forms. You mentioned spectrum there, Jochen, and perhaps I'll just come back to you with this question, but Emanuele, perhaps you can chip in after Jochen as well. We've had a question from Nick Ashby, who is based out in Australasia, and he asks that FRMCS is intended to utilize 1,900 megahertz at the moment, but the use of 5G opens up the opportunity for all 5G spectrum bands. So he asks, what are the barriers to FRMCS becoming essentially spectrum agnostic? Do you want to just touch on that, Jochen, and then Emanuele, if you want to follow up?
Yeah, sure. So, of course, let's say the move from a GSM-R world into FRMCS opens up a lot of opportunities also on the spectrum side. So while there is a definition that we start with these 1900 as a kind of an anchor spectrum, which is absolutely sufficient for a like-to-like migration scenario, right? So I think from a bandwidth perspective, there's much more bandwidth available than what we have today in GSM-R. But looking to the probably more advanced use cases where you want to do maybe use cases like predictive maintenance based on AI workload, right? And this is going definitely in that direction. Then the bandwidth might be limited, or you have scenarios where you want to deal with the MNO network as a kind of a backup solution to lower your investment for, let's say, for the resilience efforts you need to put on the table. So from that perspective, there's definitely an opportunity to deal with this with the MNO networks. But they're also coming with, let's say, some constraints on the MNO networks, which is that these networks are, let's say, by default not built up to carry mission critical networks, also from a, I would say, availability point of view. But there is definitely a play and a coexistence and a partnership with MNOs for the railway infrastructure makes absolutely a lot of sense.
And Emanuele, I'll just come back to you partly because you are joining us from Melbourne. You mentioned the role of ERA and the European landscape in the FRMCS transition, but just give us a sense of where we are outside of Europe in the rest of the world. What's your view on how the migration is looking outside of Europe?
Yeah, I mean clearly, ERTMS as ETCS as train protection system plus RMR, which today is, let's say, GSM-R, tomorrow will be GSM-R and FRMCS, is highly let's say standardized, and clearly in Europe there are a certain amount of constraints of what the various member states need to do. Okay. The operations are much more complicated because of this vision of the single European railway area and train going from Rome to maybe Paris and beyond. You having a seamless also technology experience. Clearly, in other geography in the world, again, Australia is an example. I mean, if you run at the beginning, if you're planning to run more limited operation, an isolated operation with less, let's say, border interoperability constraint, indeed, I mean, there would be more freedom to start to embrace the let's say the next generation technology. There is also, back to the question that Nick was asking, the topic of spectrum. So whereas in Europe at the moment, let's say the specification mandate at least the use of what is called RMR band, which has been allocated to or will be allocated to fundamentally every infrastructure manager in Europe. In other parts of the world, the various regulators may decide to allocate different bands. Yeah. So there's certainly more flexibility. And what we see is that when there are, let's say, new railway deployments around the world, by the way, this can also be, for example, urban metro systems, because let's not forget FRMCS by definition is not only, clearly is mainly the main use case is replacement of GSM-R, RTMS, ETCS, but there is also an ambition to serve the entire railway sector at, let's say, at large. So there are actually initiatives to start to maybe embrace in the next technology, because I mean, starting to invest now with the sort of life cycle that we need, the railway industry is asking to this type of technology is really a conundrum today, whether to keep investing in something which is a bit, let's say, mature and embracing the new technology. Clearly, it really depends also on, let's say, on the ecosystem, whether you got already an existing system, you need to interoperate. So we do see, it's not deniable. I mean, we are even supporting this as example as Nokia, further deployment of GSM-R, but we do see indeed around the world, especially in situation of isolated operation, the customers trying to, and their consultant trying to maybe start to embrace the next technology. Although there is a bit of a challenge, but I think the industry is coping with it very well, that not all the specs are already 100% defined. Yeah? So comply to something that does not yet exist. It requires also on both sides, the industry and let's say the buyer, to maybe look at this with a bit of an open eye, in terms of what you can possibly comply to.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that's a good sort of explainer of perhaps some of the differences between the European migration, where you've got obviously the role of the IRA, the TSIs, and the integration with the RTMS and other programs outside of Europe. Clearly, a lot of railways don't face those constraints. But Karel van Gils, I'll come back to you. We've had a couple of questions. We've had quite a lot of questions incoming from the audience, as you would expect already, during this first half hour, which is great. Quite a lot of the questions are about who is going to pay and how much infrastructure that already exists for GSM-R can be reused for the FRMCS transition. So, Karel, were these questions that came out in your survey? Are these the sorts of things that you're hearing from railways and infrastructure managers? Are they raising these concerns, especially the one about how is all this going to be funded? Are they raising it with in your surveys too?
Yes, definitely. So what we see and what we hear, that there are only very limited funding schemes now available for FRMCS. So we see the difference between member states and different companies, but it's very limited, and I think it's also due to the phase where we are in. We are heading towards TSI, we're heading towards clarity on the systems, etc. But it didn't prevent us from doing some first analysis on cost drivers, what is going on. Maybe the question of using GSM-R equipment for FRMCS can be answered by Jochen or Emmanuel. But what we see is that cost drivers, for example, also not for onboard equipment, but for the whole testing, validation, and authorization process, takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of effort, and with that, a lot of money. So we are, together with the industry, together with ERA, we are now diving into what are the possibilities to ease and to simplify these processes, and bearing in mind that we have to do over 40,000 of vehicles to retrofit with FRMCS and over 60,000 kilometers of tracks. So when we do it one by one or type by type, that it's a huge effort and it's a costly effort. And going towards a single European railway area, where we support the growth of railway operations, especially also for freight, it should be considered how to deal with that. So yes, cost is a topic, and by the way, not only for the infra managers, but especially also what we see for the RUs. And with that, we see that we agree on the specification. We agree that we're heading towards the TSI, but we also see that we have different starting points. So there will be greenfield and brownfield migrations. There will be migrations on data, but there also will be migrations for specific RUs with older rolling stock, and say, oh, my rolling stock will not see any data transmission or ETCS. So let's start with the FRMCS functionality of maybe voice only. What about handhelds? So there are different topics to consider in the migration, and that leads to different cost analysis. And as a last remark, it's not only cost, but it's also depending on legislations. What we see is different legislation in different countries. The usage of MNOs is still different in different European countries. So we have to consider, especially also the cross-border topics. As Emmanuel already said, it's heading towards the single European railway area. It's what we all support, but there are some cross-border topics to solve, also in migration. But I leave the question on cost, on usage of reusage of GSM-R equipment towards FRMCS, maybe to Jochen or Emmanuel.
I'll come to you, Jochen, on that. The question has actually come from Ian Rod Erin, the Irish State Railway, and I think that's probably quite interesting in itself because a relatively smaller rail network within Europe, and a self-contained one, of course, well, apart from Northern Ireland. So, Jochen, just address that question. What do you think? What's your current view in terms of how much existing telecoms infrastructure could be reused for FRMCS?
Yes, certainly. Again, as I touched on, you can reuse the tower infrastructure of GSM-R as long as your tower is still, I would say, in a condition that it is capable to serve additional antennas and additional equipment there. And we did a study in terms of the cell range in 1900 compared to 900, which is the GSM-R band. And if we basically put as a condition that you need to serve it like for like, also from a bandwidth perspective, then your future FRMCS network, just again as a like for like replacement, doesn't necessarily need a lot of additional sites, right? However, at the end of the day, you would not be able to embrace the full, I would say, set of use cases FRMCS and the extended spectrum and bandwidth would basically give you as a possibility. So of course, reusing passive infrastructure like towers, reusing infrastructure like backhauling, depending on how advanced it is already today in a deployment. Is there already fiber? Is there already maybe WDM networks on top of this? This all you can reuse. Everything else is of course an additional investment into active infrastructure. We also think to, for instance, use replacement or maintenance scenarios you have already today in GSM-R, right? So you probably need to go, if you want to maintain or you need to maintain GSM-R for the next 10 years, you need to renew also pieces of your hardware, being it even antennas, being it on the core side, servers or whatsoever. Always think in a kind of a way that okay, whatever I need to put now for the maintenance of GSM-R, for the continuation of using GSM-R, always take into consideration that you can use this investment for investing already in FRMCS-based technology elements, again, like antennas, like cloudification on the core side, and so on and so forth. So if we combine these things, then of course we can do the deployment of FRMCS much more cost efficient and not look like a complete new network with all network elements associated to this.
Emanuele, do you want to contribute any additional remarks on this question of reusing existing infrastructure?
No, I think Jochen said it. Let's say said it all. I mean, again, this is 5G technology, so you dimension it unlike 2G, based on really on the capacity, on the throughput that you want to achieve at cell edge. So I mean, clearly, but this is also a broadband technology. So clearly, there is. I mean, we really see that the reutilization and the rejuvenation of the current, let's say, especially GSM-R, for example, infrastructure will certainly be the trend. There will be densification. I mean, that's inevitable, but maybe this can happen a bit more over time, or phase over time, for those infrastructure managers that maybe will be facing some challenges when it comes to securing, for example, the funds. I mean, knowing that, I think we have seen, and again, Karen maybe may contribute to this based on the questionnaire. Let's say there is certainly a basic need of, let's say, feature parity to what you do today with GSM-R to G, but clearly, in order to justify and improve the business case, there are additional sort of capability that the industry expects broadband to bring, that inevitably will require some sort of additional amount of assets. But there are many also business model that the industry may keep on using, like it has been already today. We see tower companies interested into how to also monetize those assets. We see railway potentially considering to, let's say, to work together with this additional player, and then maybe reutilize infrastructure, also to host, public network to let's say, to improve the customer experience, on board onboard the trains, because I mean, again, clearly there is one network for, let's say, really for the mission critical use cases. But as we said at the beginning, the MNOs, absolutely, we think and see. I mean, they will play a role as backup or as complementary services in order to bring more capacity and throughput. And I mean, they need masts, and there could also be the innovative, let's say, business model to ensure that the investment is somehow balanced from the various stakeholders.
That phrase densification certainly cropped up a couple of times at the UIC conference in Paris, and as it is Thanksgiving over in the US, we should probably talk Turkey. So talk about money specifically. Christophe Despier, I wanted to just come to you. You wanted to contribute a little bit on this question of cost, the cost of the migration, and perhaps you could comment a little bit as well on how we sort of de-risk what is already sounding from Carol's comments like a very, very complex program of migration.
Yeah, because and thanks for that, because the question of course is important and is crucial for all of us. However, this question gives us the chance to see how we want to address. Do we want FRMCS to answer one-to-one the previous need? Or do you want to be compliant and solely compliant to the shift of techno? Or are you looking for new operation model, as Emanuele started also to open up? Or are you looking to new services, operations that you will be able to integrate thanks to the new techno? So of course, cost is important, but behind the cost, what's the value that will that bring, or the new services, or how this will serve your ambitions, your company ambitions, and your company strategy. Because it will become more safety, because it will bring more train to the corridor, because it will open up to a new way to look at hypervision, supervision of the train, because it will bring through the framework of FRMCS access to high band to the passenger, etc., etc. So the question of course, the question of cost is key, and then it has to be looked at an ecosystem perspective, because of course telco players will step in, but signaling will be there, operators will be there, train manufacturers will be there. So it's something that has to be looked by everyone. And also, as Karel was mentioning, it's not just the product or the service when it will be operating, it's how to bring that to life, because we have to test the different fields in different conditions, to write the specifications, to detail it, to go further, to validate. Within a word on industry standard, we know which is one of the more regulated in order to serve this and to secure the business and the passengers and freight traffics. So for sure, we have to look by incremental changes, and that's why from 5G-R to Moren to the different POCs that the different communities, associations, or countries, manufacturers are doing, and how to, and that's one of the key challenge, how to put that in front of financial investments and service, return on investment, and how to bet, I don't know if bet is the right word, but I would say it, how to bet into the new functions, how we will be able to sell them in a different way.
So really, there's a whole amount of work to be done here to build a business case, and perhaps a whole, rethinking of some of the operating models that underpin rail operations currently. Carol, I'll come back to you on this topic, because you sort of mentioned in your previous comments about, freight operators, and we know, and I certainly know because I hear it, a private freight operator in Europe, I mean, they are already complaining bitterly about things like the cost of ETCS fitment for locomotives, or digital automatic coupler, as we alluded to. What's your view of what Christophe is saying about rethinking business models and finding a way to monetize some of the benefits for FRMCS? Is this something that, as Europe's rail, you can perhaps sort of facilitate or bring stakeholders together? What's your view on that?
Yes. I think what we are planning to do is to do some best practice exchange, also on cost, but also make some analysis on cost drivers for various RUs, IMs, etc. But I can confirm what Emanuele and Christophe says, because it is a huge investment. to start replacing the current functionality in GSM-R towards FRMCS. But when you look beyond that, it is not to underestimate it, but when beyond that, you look at the life cycle cost or other functionalities, then there is a contribution to the business case for both the freight operator, but also the passenger operators, to use the advantages of the full digitalization. Of course, it's built on stable hardware. It's not changing the hardware in the rolling stock every second year, but coordinated with some maintenance intervals, but doing some software updates, adding functionalities over the air, etc. It's changing the cost perspective for the sector as a complete. But we also have to dive, of course, into the initial cost, because the initial cost. Now, you mentioned already the freight industry, the freight lessors. Yeah, they have a lot of programs upcoming, digitalization programs. So let's do it in a coordinated, simple way. So not today retrofit with ERTMS, in 2 years with DAC, and 2 years later we come up with FRMCS. So there is an alignment question we will dive into, how we can make it and support the sector and also the industry to do it in a most ease and cost efficient way. And these are some challenges, but it gives also the advantages of the digitalization of our sector.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think we need to be fair, don't we, in balancing the sort of challenge argument with the opportunity here, because the opportunity is significant. Emanuele, I'll come back to you if I may. Just give us a sense. Carol touched on it there, but just give us a sense on the future-proofing side of FRMCS. Just, again, just remind the audience, what are the real benefits? We're talking about over-the-air software upgrades, for example, which can't really easily be done at the moment. Just give us a sense of some of those benefits, that if you are particularly a train operator or a fleet owner watching this webinar, what are the real benefits that you need to hold on to from the FRMCS adoption?
I mean, there is a whole plethora of, let's say, more efficient utilization of data, I suppose. I mean, we are getting more and more into a world which is absolutely driven by data consumed, very close to where the data is produced, and edge computing. Every industry, frankly, and railway is no different. I mean, you more and more using new tools coming available, like let's say artificial intelligence and other supporting tools to make better use and better sense of the information that this big piece of machinery and metal produces, going along and detecting things and sensing the world and the environment, the right of ways is going through. I mean, they are really, and again, the use cases are, I think, have been very well spelled out by the industry. There is even a document which, let's say, clarifies them. But I'm sure, it'd be like what happened in all our life, that live the experience of moving from, a 2G phone, just doing phone calls and sending SMS to broadband. To having broadband. I mean, see what kind of incredible creativity the humankind has been able to come up with over the years. One thing that you mentioned was the future proofness. I think is important to remind something. It's a bit technological, but I think it's an important element. So, in the moment, let's say the industry, and in particular the onboard, also part of the technology and the industry, will actually go and move to the next generation. I mean, that sort of very tight and almost hard-coded link between the application level and the communication bearer will actually be severed. I mean, it's in the moment that the industry will be able to adopt fundamentally a packet-based broadband technology. I mean, the utilization of multi-radio access technology, the migration to the next generation will be somehow seamless, unlike what is today, the constraint which is related to how, let's say, the 2G technology and its bonding with the key train application has been engineered. By the way, very well. I mean, it's doing a perfect job, and that's also maybe why sometimes it's a bit difficult to also consider why let's say, while moving on. Yeah. So that's a very important element of the future proofness, and as we go towards the next, let's say, generation and waves of generation of 3GPP. I think that's really very important element to remind.
Yeah, that we can do future migration of technology in a much easier way. And I know even in parts of Asia, particularly there's moves towards even 6G telecom standards, and I guess part of the FRMCS story is to prepare the railway so that it doesn't have to go through this pain of the GSM-R to FRMCS transition.
And also the other aspect the other aspect, Nick, that unlike this, in 2G, this became a -R, like a branch of like a different branch of software with the Irene function and the ETSI additional functionality. I mean, all of this is being fundamentally delegated to the application layer, to the mission critical push to data, push to talk, and what actually the foundational element of the technology will be a normal, let's say, 5G commercial off the shelf that clearly will have taken into account a certain amount of railway need. As it started with 3GPP release 12, starting to onboard what the public safety industry needed to do what you normally were doing in Tetra. Over the releases, then other industry, started to chime in their needs, and 3GPP has been listening to them and onboarding them. The automotive industry, the automation industry, and certainly, nonetheless, the let's say the railway industry. I think that is quite, let's say, quite an important level. And all of this is really going even towards, let's say, cloud nativity, and that's another element of disaggregation between the function, that delivers a certain behavior, and really what is going to be the piece of metal, if you allow me, where you're going to install that particular functionality. I mean, also, the whole industry is going from bare metal, let's say, software built for a purpose-built piece of hardware, to fundamentally a disaggregation with the cloudification of the so-called network functions. That is also gonna bring maybe there's gonna be a bit of a step function at the beginning, but over time it will be fundamentally decoupling the computing and storing element from the application itself, and it will become easier to move on.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I just staying briefly on this question of the sort of technical details of the FRMCS transition, and I'm conscious we've had loads of questions coming from the audience, and we're probably not going to get through all of them. But we've had a question specifically about how far FRMCS is being developed with a view to integrating other railway components. So, for example, point machines, signaling equipment via the ULINX standards. I don't know, Jochen, perhaps that feels like perhaps a question for you. Could you answer? That's a question that's come in from the audience about ULINX standards, FRMCS, and trackside components like point machines, I guess, with a view to the IoT era.
Yeah. So just to remind everybody, we are using, let's say, vanilla 5G technology at the end of the day, which is nothing different than having a kind of a data pipe between the train and the backend systems, whatever the backend system is. So FRMCS is developed where I would say where commercial products are even available, on those ends where we don't expect, I would say, any hardware change coming from the finalization of the TSI anymore. So, for instance, we have just, I don't know, 2 months ago, we have released the radio access as a commercial product. We have, let's say, released the core piece as a commercial product, because whatever needs to be done there to comply with the final TSI can be done in software. So whenever I would say something can be done in software, the availability is almost there already today. When we look to the adoption of the, I would say, application around this, then we see, of course, different maturity when it comes to ETCS. We have projects where ETCS runs over LTE, for instance, which is technically wise basically the same. But these are raw projects at the moment. Of course, we have projects where we see CBTC being using LTE or 5G technology. So I would say the adoption on the application on top of that, the typical railway applications are there, and especially the Morane projects are designed for basically making sure that, let's say, the TOBA gateways, the CAP radios, the ETCS systems are basically working with this. So I think we see good maturity on that side. When it comes to other, I would say, more not really safety critical applications, then we see a lot of stuff happening at the moment, adopting the possibility of having a data link to the train or to the locomotive. Up to the level that, let's say, we can do with this inspection of the track and so on and so forth. So I would say, and this is for me probably something which is super critical for everybody to understand. Of course, it is seen as a burden to migrate from one system to the other. But once this is done, I think the gain in, let's say, getting a much higher reliable system, in getting a much more, I would say, cost optimized railway system as such. I think this is not yet, I would say, well understood, because the networks are not there. But the enablement, what these networks will bring is let's say, in terms of value creation, will be super big. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. I'll just come to you, because we've touched on ETCS, and you mentioned the single European railway area a couple of times earlier. I mean, just give us a brief overview of. I mean, are you optimistic that the FRMCS migration in Europe will learn the lessons, positive and potentially negative, from the rollout of ETCS, which has obviously gone, I think it's fair to say, more slowly than had been hoped by policymakers? And do you think that the FRMCS migration can really give a shot in the arm, a boost to the single European railway area goal?
Yeah, definitely. I think we definitely learn lessons from the past. The pace of the ETCS rollout, what we are now heading on, cost drivers, authorization, etc. I think it's taken into account now with the FRMCS deployment. What I also see on the FRMCS side is working closely together with the industry, UIC, with the sector, to solve these issues. Working together in Morane to test the specifications, be clear on the specifications, and of course there are some hiccups. But I think working towards implementation of a smooth implementation of required specifications on FRMCS is definitely a lesson learned. But we should also combine the two, as we are now in the phase of rolling out ERTMS in different countries. Yeah, the current status of the rollout, of course, affects also the FRMCS rollout. So already rollout have been taken place. So there will be another connection to FRMCS potentially on rolling stock. Then when there is a new greenfield, or later maybe combined rollout program. So yes, lesson learned. It's not a single pillar development within FRMCS, but taking into account as Emmanuel said, the vehicle application, the vehicle authorization, etc. I think it's definitely a lesson learned also towards the future. And I think that's also the focus we should have. We can look back, but let's focus on the future and go towards the opportunities the digitalization will bring. And with that, I do not neglect some difficulties we have to overcome.
Yeah, thank you. Well, that's a very sort of realistic position, and I think everybody in the rail sector I'm sure there would be a large degree of consensus to say that we can't keep managing these mega projects in kind of isolation, and there has to be a level of integration around things like ETCS deployment and FRMCS. Yeah, thank you. Just before we go back to the poll, and then we'll wrap the discussion up for this morning. But I did just want to touch. I mean, the four of us talked about this before the call began. Emanuele, I'll just come back to you. I mean, we should probably mention cybersecurity and that aspects of the migration. I mean, I don't think we've had any questions from the audience about cybersecurity so far, but it is a topic that I think we need to address. So just Emanuele, just give us a sense by which, does the effort, what are the cybersecurity implications of the FRMCS migration, and what should people in the rail sector keep in mind when they think about cybersecurity and FRMCS? Do you have any sort of messages that you'd like to share?
I mean, so first and foremost, I mean, even in USC, they are dedicated now work stream when it comes to cybersecurity, and FRMCS. Clearly, the 5G technology itself is natively coming and being, conceptualized with a lot of security mechanism built inside. But again, there is that much you can do in the technology itself for security, and also the policies which are the sector is being enforced. Needs CRA and others, the new standard coming up, go somehow beyond what the product itself can do. There are additional mitigation control you need to put in place. There are processes that clearly and competencies developing. I mean, the blurring line that is starting to become between, let's say, the analysis of risks and the analysis of cybersecurity risks. So these are all things which are really very profoundly to be taken into account as we embrace into the next generation. I mean, this is more than dropping a couple of Active Directory firewalls and actually you think you've done the trick. I mean, there is much more to that. And again, the technology comes with certainly an amount of this all disaggregated way of developing the function and all this certificate you will have to deploy, automate, just as an example. I mean, these are things that will be inevitably, the way that if you want to really put in place and apply a certain requirement, in, let's say, operator, contractors, consultant will have to consider while specifying, procuring, deploying.
Yeah. Christoph, you wanted to comment a little bit on that topic as well.
Yeah, for sure, because as we mentioned, FRMCS is bringing the ability to go to software in the air. And I think this is one of the key points that people have to understand. It's not a monolithic function that we are bringing to our industry. Here's the new framework to work, to base, and to develop new activity. And if I take the 5G technology, cybersecurity is key for that, because not only to secure that all the exchanges are secured, etc., but it brings also other aspects, other value, other functions, and hence we need also to go to the mission critical activity and to secure that everything is going in a expected way. And I think that back to that, let us use what the telco business have been able to go and to use RTX, because it's not the first migration of telco. Let's say it's a major and first migration since a while for rail, or for telco in rail, but not for telco as such. So, and the technology that we're using is a 5G. So let us use as industry what we want from the telco and for the telco in the rail business. Let's use my way and my recommendation, a part of the RTX that we have built, and let's assume that we have framework processes in order to go fast and automatized all the shifts, migration, changes, and ecosystem driving that we have to manage as an industry.
Thank you very much. Well, we're coming pretty much to the end of our hour's discussion now. So I think at this point we had a little bit of a deviation there into cybersecurity, but I think it's a really important topic, and I'm pleased to see that it has actually been mentioned by some of the viewers now in the audience. So I think thank you to Emanuele and Christoph for addressing that. But as we approach the end of the session, I'm just going to ask each of our four panelists to just give us one key conclusion or one message they'd like people in the rail sector to take away from this morning's discussion about the migration to FRMCS, and perhaps a key message for how that can best be managed. Carol van Hils, I'll come to you first.
I would advise to start getting some knowledge on the FRMCS topic and work together with the industry on preparing activities towards 2030, 2028. So don't wait for 2030, but start delivering now. I think pre-production, pre-deployment products are becoming more and more available. Work together with the industry to have a better knowledge.
Absolutely, yeah. Don't wait. Act now. Jochen Appel, what's your concluding message for this morning?
Yeah, I would say whatever you do with your network today, being at GSM-R or being at different layers of the network, take into consideration to do whatever you do. Is there a benefit for a future FRMCS deployment already to be developed, right? So take this into consideration and put it into your design process.
Thank you very much. Emanuele, your concluding remark?
I mean, we're almost there with the standardization. We're really progressing, it's really, I think, just a couple of years away. So this is really now, we really see the finishing line.
Yeah, fantastic. And I think that's a really good message as well, because there has been talk about FRMCS, at least within that part of the rail and telecoms industry, for a long time. So yeah, it's great that we can see the finishing line. And Christophe Despy, your final message to the audience this morning.
Yeah. I would recommend that you have to identify which whole value you want to get from the FRMCS and to prepare yourself and your ecosystem and to prepare the shift.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Well, listen, thank you, everybody. Thank you to our panelists for your contributions over the course of the last hour. That's been a really wide-ranging discussion. I think I owe the audience an apology, because we had so many questions in, both before the session and even more so during the last hour. I haven't managed to ask a fraction of them, but they're all there in the feed, and the feed will remain live for a few hours over the course of today. And you'll also be able to see the poll results if they've changed over the course of the hour, about how far the rail sector is ready for the migration to FRMCS. So I'd like to thank all of you watching for posting your questions and your comments in the feed this morning. We really appreciate that level of engagement with the topic. And just a reminder that this session will be available to watch again in on-demand format via railwaygazette.com within 24 hours of this broadcast, in case you or your colleagues would like to watch any of it again. But on that note, I'd just like to thank our 4 panelists and thank you, the audience, for watching this morning, and wish you a very good day from London. Thank you very much, and goodbye.